So many of us have fuzzy, nostalgic memories of Disney, be it their classic animated films, the second renaissance with hits like Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King, or more recent pop culture staples like Star Wars and the MCU. But like all things you love, there's a weird dark side to the corporate happiness monolith. Have you seen how expensive those parks are, even without factoring in parking or food? What about the creepy abandoned properties? The mysterious death that happened in their parks and the controversy surrounding their movies. In this uncertain world, there are at least 3 things on which all of us can be certain. Disney loves animals, nature documentaries are reliable, and lemmings love to take their lives by throwing themselves off cliffs. If that summarizes your philosophy of life, prepare to have your world shaken. One of the most enduring beliefs about animals was perpetuated by a Disney nature documentary that is not a fan favorite of animal lovers. In 1958, Walt Disney Studios released White Wilderness. Directed by James Algar and narrated by Winston Hibler, it was filmed over 3 years. It won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature and the Golden Bear for Best Documentary at the 1959 Berlin Film Festival. White Wilderness contained an educational segment about lemmings. These furry little rodents are native to northern portions of Sweden, Canada, Finland, and Norway. According to legend, when lemming populations grow too large, they cool the herd by throwing themselves to death off cliffs into the frigid waters of the Arctic Ocean. Disney chose to use White Wilderness to focus on the mass self-murder legend. After briefly introducing viewers to the rodent, narrator Hibler ominously observes,
"Yet over they go, casting themselves bodily out into space."
As he spoke, the camera captured scenes of lemmings doing exactly that. Breathlessly, viewers watched a massive herd of the rodents running toward the edge of the cliff. Surely they could see the fate that awaited them and would turn back.
Here's an actual living legend. For it's said of this tiny animal that it commits mass suicide by rushing into the sea in droves.
The film's playful soundtrack abruptly changes to sounds reminiscent of the shower scene in Psycho. Viewers watched in abject horror as hordes of lemmings throw themselves to certain doom to the rocks and icy waters below. As the segment approaches its end, we see the cold, soggy pack of lemmings swimming toward the horizon. The narrator solemnly tells us that the swim will not last long.
And soon the Arctic Sea is dotted with tiny, bobbing bodies.
Thus ends the most depressing and traumatizing Disney scene since Bambi's mother was slaughtered before her son's eyes. Setting aside for a moment the wisdom of such a creepy narrative for a film that was targeted at children, let's take a look at places where White Wilderness got a little confused with the facts. For one thing, it failed to distinguish dispersion from mass self-murder. Lemming population numbers fluctuate wildly. They can, in a very short time, multiply their numbers tenfold. When the population reaches the point where the resources of the habitat cannot sustain everyone, they perform the migratory practice of dispersion. Simply put, they spread out and seek out more sustainable environments. When they do this, accidents are inevitable. At some point in history, someone observed a lemming or two lose its footing and fall off a cliff, and that's probably how the legend was born. There has never been any evidence, however, that the little critters have ever engaged in the type of mass acts suggested by the documentary. Another problem with White Wilderness was that it was filmed in Alberta, Canada. This province, blessedly rat-free, also happens to be lemmings-free. Producers paid children in Manitoba a bounty of 25 cents per lemming to round up a couple of dozen critters. The lemmings were shipped south to be featured in the film. Unfortunately, the lemmings that we see in White Wilderness happen to be of a type that does not practice the dispersion migration, to begin with. Then there is the issue with the location. Alberta is landlocked and without access to the waters of the Arctic. The supposedly endless body of frigid water in which we see the doomed lemmings was in reality the Bow River. So how did they get the dramatic footage of masses of lemmings hurling themselves to self-inflicted destruction? It was accomplished through a little movie magic. Tight camera shots and creative camera angles made the few available lemmings appear to be part of a much larger herd. To urge the bewildered animals toward certain destruction, the crew members built spinning turntables covered in snow to jostle the lemmings and push them off the edge of the cliff. For a little extra drama, some crew members picked up lemmings and threw them over the cliff's edge, making it appear that the rodents were leaping eagerly into the jaws of death. In short, this was not Disney's finest moment. White Wilderness remains a source of trauma for children who remember watching it when it was released. Since it had such a powerful impact on viewers, the whole myth of lemming self-destruction has been firmly cemented in popular culture. In reality, White Wilderness does not document lemming self-destruction. It is solid evidence of animal cruelty. Did you know that Walt Disney served as an FBI informant for over 25 years? Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Technically, this was kept a very tight secret for a very long time. It wasn't until the Freedom of Information Act in 1993 that documents confirming Disney's involvement with the Federal Bureau of Investigation came to light, per the New York Times. Disney passed on names to the federal government of those who may be considered subversive in Hollywood, although the released document has a significant amount of information redacted for national security purposes, and just who Walt Disney informed about remains a bit of a mystery. Disney provided so much information to the Bureau that he was made a full special agent in charge contact, or a very trusted informer. The relationship between Disney and J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the Bureau, was an intricate one. For Disney's work, Hoover let Disney film in the FBI headquarters, and Disney even changed some character portrayals of FBI agents to appease the Bureau. It's surprising to learn of such political and national motivations just under the surface. But as the New York Times puts it, the Disney dossier is a historic reminder of the Cold War years when Hollywood's writers, actors, directors, and producers, and their organizations clashed about political beliefs. Ultimately, this secret was kept for over 50 years until the Disney documents were released. But with the Freedom of Information Act, Disney's tenure as an informant couldn't be kept a secret forever. Some Disney parks have been abandoned without any clear explanation, with the most controversial one being the River Country, Disney's first water park. Now River Country lies rusting and abandoned, shuttered after a troubled history that saw 3 young children killed, including one who contracted a rare brain-eating infection from an amoeba found in the water. In 1980, the park suffered a major setback when an 11-year-old boy contracted amoebic meningoencephalitis, an infection of the nervous system and brain caused by an amoeba in the water. The rare disease is almost always fatal, and he died shortly afterwards, though Disney was largely absolved of blame since the amoeba can breed in almost any fresh water and hot weather. Then, in 1982, disaster struck again after a 14-year-old boy drowned after dropping into the lake at the end of the Whoop and Holler slide. Disney was sued by the family, which claimed there was no warning posted about how deep the water was, and after hearing from a lifeguard that dozens of people had to be rescued from the slide per day, a court handed down a settlement of $375. Another 13-year-old boy then drowned in 1989, but despite this, the park kept operation for more than a decade afterwards. However, the terror attacks on the Twin Towers in 2001 saw tourist revenue to the U.S. plummet, and Disney was forced to cut opening hours at all its parks to cope with the loss. River Country had closed its door in September of that year for seasonal maintenance and was expected to open again in 2002, but that never happened. For the next 3 years, the park sat abandoned before Disney announced its permanent closure in 2005. The company has never given a reason, though likely falling revenues and the fact that it had since opened 2 larger water parks at Disney World persuaded them there was a better use for the land. Disneyland, the happiest place on earth, has a few dark tragedies, and the most ghastly, which was suspicious as well as fodder for urban legends, belonged to Debbie Stone, a hostess who tragically died in 1974. At Disneyland, a major ride called Carousel of Progress was redesigned to become a new attraction, America Sings. On June 28, 1974, an automated musical extravaganza that paid tribute to the musical history of America debuted. The ride featured 6 stages in the central nucleus of the building, These 6 theaters rotated around in sequence so as to allow the theater audience to experience each popular performance in sequence. The performance consisted of a 24-minute show, featuring 4 big musical acts with a medley of period tunes sung by animated animals. During such a show, it was the job of the Disney hostess to stand on the left-hand side of each stage and greet the audience at the start of each show and bid them farewell at the end of each show. The only glitch was that in the previous ride, Carousel of Progress, the theaters moved around the nucleus in a clockwise direction. This meant that the walls on the left-hand side of the stage moved away from each other. But in America Sings, the rotation was reversed, which meant that the walls moved towards each other on the left-hand side of the stage and closed in place to separate each theater from the other. On the fateful night of July 8, 1974, Debbie Stone had an evening shift at America Sings. Just before her shift, she called up her parents and exclaimed to them that she was in love and wanted their permission to get engaged. Obviously, her parents were happy for her. A little later, at around 10:30 p.m., when the last show got over and the stages were shifting position in between the 45-second interval, a guest from the adjacent theater heard a blood-chilling scream. When he and the operators rushed to the scene, they were horrified to see Debbie Stone crushed between the walls of the 2 theaters. To this day, no one knows what exactly went wrong. There have been numerous theories. Some state that Debbie may have been inclining towards the adjacent stage to talk to a fellow cast member, or she may have attempted to jump from one stage to the other, or she may have been distracted and stepped backwards without noticing. Whatever the reason, the fact remains that Debbie was crushed alive as the rotating wall closed against the stationary one. After the gruesome incident, Disneyland closed the ride for 2 days, and the stage on which Debbie died remained closed for a year. Later, the stages were installed with sensory lights to warn the operator if someone went too close to the walls, and additional changes were made by fixing breakaway walls in case the sensors failed. The ride remained operative till 1988. Then it was shut down, and the building remained obsolete till it was refurbished in 1998 for a new attraction, Innoventions. Although the rumors of Walt Disney's cryogenically frozen corpse being stored underneath the Pirates of the Caribbean ride in Disneyland are decidedly untrue, the popular attraction since 1967 apparently held a dark secret of its own. Built in 1967, the iconic boat ride that spawned 5 movies was the last ride overseen by Walt himself. Sadly, he didn't live to see it open. It's unclear as to whether he was involved with the ghoulish decision that was made by the Imagineers for the ride's design. But either way, are you ready for this? Originally, all the skeletons in the attraction were actual human bones. Yep, sounds like a story generated by the internet, but it's apparently true. The Imagineers were not happy at all with the fake skeletons they had made for the ride, and obtained actual cadavers from the UCLA Medical School, which were put in all the classic poses all over the ride, even as you see it today. The bones stayed in place for a good long while, although it's not exactly clear how long that was. What we do know is the grand majority were eventually removed and replaced with more convincing fakes, but not all of them. Not the skeleton in the bed, but the crossbones behind him. Yup, real dead human parts. I can only guess they left them behind as a reminder of the history of the ride as a hidden in-joke for Disney folks. Either way, still eerie.